I will say that, but who would be? Koki, I appreciate you joining us. A lot of big news coming out of LSU baseball. They got some big news today with Eddie Yamin. I guess let's start off with him. Your thoughts on Eddie joining this team?
Yeah, I've got to say it's a pretty big addition in terms of another power bat, another bat that has quite a bit of versatility. His experience at catcher, experience in the outfield, mostly played first base at Dayton. It is kind of interesting that they already got Luis Hernandez. They already have Trevor Schmidt. Jared Jones still might be on this team. So that's a lot of primary first basemen, I should say, even though, three of those guys that I mentioned, heck, all four of them have experience playing other positions. So I think versatility is sort of the key here. And Yamin only played 2 games at catcher collegiately, at least, but he has 22 games in right field. So they could play him in a corner if they needed him to. And also they have an open DH spot too, because I know Hayden Trubisky. So I imagine one of those guys plays DH, especially if Jared Jones comes back.
Any potential thought of him moving to third?
Yeah, that's it. I understand exactly why you're asking that question, because they need a third baseman. They don't have a pure third baseman right now on this team, especially with Tommy White out the door. And in terms of incoming freshmen, it's really just Cale. It's really just Cale Fountain as a guy who can definitely play there. I mean, Daniel Arambula, the kid from California, he's another pure third baseman. But again, both those guys are true freshmen. And Fountain might not even come to school. There's a chance that someone's really enticed with his power and picks him. So they're really light at third base at the moment, unless they're really penciling in Tanner Reeves at that spot. But he's kind of a do-everything kind of guy who can play apparently 6 different positions. So it's, 6 or 7 different positions. So, yeah, I mean, they're in a bit of a hole right now at third base. And, I haven't seen enough from any of these guys. I mean, they could try to convert one of them into a third baseman, but I think at the end of the day, I think they'd be better off with getting someone who is a pure third baseman to play third base.
So you bring up Luis Hernandez in there too, but just to run through them, we'll talk about just this class in general. Luis Hernandez could possibly go in draft. I don't know if that's going to likely happen. We'll see. Mm-hmm. But Chris Stanfield also from Auburn, Zach Cohen, Luke Hayden, Devin Sheeran, and Chandler Dorsey are the ones that have transferred in. Any of those guys that you really like a lot, and why do you think that the transition might be good for one of these guys if you're just looking at them all?
Yeah, I think Cowan just feels like a starter to me because of how many polished pitches he has, just how polished he is as a pitcher in general. I mean, the 110 innings this past season. He's not going to be a big strikeout guy. He's going to be more of you probably expect him more be I'm saying an innings eater. That's a bit of a that's a bit of a red mark, I guess. But I still view him as someone who can fill into a rotation spot if you need him to. Really can feel for his changeup, can locate his pitches really well. And I think LSU fans are pretty familiar with him just because I think everyone kind of expected him to start against LSU in the regional when he was at Wofford. So, but the name I think that really sort of jumps out to me the most, at least from the pitching side, is Devin Sheeran. And he's just a fascinating case because 4.7 ERA guy at Mount St. Mary's doesn't really seem like an LSU guy, right? But I mean, over 100 strikeouts and 70 some odd innings. He's 6'5". I think he said on Moscona's show that he's actually more like 6'6", 6'7", and he's 245 pounds. He's a big kid, and his fastball gets up to 98 miles an hour, and he's a really good slider. And that is just a very fun piece to have when you already have a couple other, talented right-handed arms on your roster at the moment. And I think in terms of right-handed pitching, they're in a pretty good spot right now, and just in terms of like depth and guys with potential. Even Chandler Dorsey, someone who can get up to 95. They had a pretty good, and he had pretty good numbers in South Florida this year. Then you have Jay New coming back. Then you have Jay Shorts coming back, and all of a sudden your right-handed pitching is looking pretty strong, even if you don't include some of the guys who may or may not be back, like Fidel Ulloa, for example. It's really the left-handed pitching that I'm keeping an eye out for, and how do they sort of bolster that, add more depth to that, because there's really only 2 guys who are slated to come back from last season's team, and they're adding Connor Ware, who's a JUCO guy. You don't really necessarily know what you're going to get from him. Talented arm, but he's had injury issues, so they're just really light with left-handed pitching, and I'm just like really curious to see how they fix that.
Yeah, some would say go to get the ECU kid Root, but I hear that he's taking a visit to Auburn. But I mean, he would be a big time addition. Koki, I look at him. I think Sheeran is the most interesting to me in a lot of ways because you're talking about, like you said, like we have one of our priests that are in here, Father Abear. He's like, hey, I did my seminary at Mount St. Mary, and he's like, Blake, there wasn't kids throwing 88 at Mount St. Mary when I was there. This kid's throwing 98. He's got a nasty slider. And I think that he's like when you see a kid that's got tools, but maybe that didn't have the refinement, I think is an awesome deal. I'm very interested to see how he puts it together. Let me ask you about Chris Stanfield because, look, we've seen someone in the SEC, I don't want to say struggled. I don't think Stanfield struggled, but a guy hitting below 300 Stanfield feels very Michael Braswell-ish to me. Yeah, am I wrong in saying that? And then secondly, how do you like Stanfield being added to this team?
It seems like he, in a way, is the Paxton Kling replacement, but is also with many shades of Michael Braswell because, SEC guy, needs to work on his hit tool, has defensive value, positional value because he plays up the middle, right? In this case, it's center field.
Right.
I think he played every game in center field or every game but one in center field this past year for Auburn. But again, he needs to work on this. He needs to work on, generating more power as a hitter, which is exactly what we talked about with Michael Braswell. And even though Braswell didn't become like a big home run hitter this past season, he hit a lot of doubles and he drove the ball a lot better. And I think that's something that Stanfield's going to have to work on. And, Jay Johnson's the right guy to sort of try to unlock that. And he's a veteran guy, so with some tools. So you figure that he can open up to what Jay wants from him. The one thing with Stanfield to keep an eye out for is that he's also draft eligible. So there's not 100%. We're not 100% sure if he's going to be on this team this upcoming year. Sometimes you just never know about these things, right? I think everyone thought. I mean, they even announced that Carter Young was going to be on the team 2 years ago, and the Orioles turned around. I think they lost their second or third round pick because they couldn't agree. Yeah, and they gave him a boatload of money, and then he never came. And the school announced it and everything. Jack Pineda was drafted in the 11th round.
Trust me, I remember. Go look at that Young tweet and look at the fans like 10 minutes giving you boy ripping. I'm like, the Oilers literally just announced it. What do you want me to do? I mean, like, hey man, I'm just telling you what they just announced. I don't know. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
It was the crazy Carter Young situation. And Jack Pineda got picked in the 11th round by the Royals. And I mean, Dylan T-Break, people were very excited about him. And then the Mets took him in the 8th round. And I think Paul Gervais even announced he was going to come back. And then the Mets ended up taking him. And so like it's never over until it's over with these things. So that's why I like to put in that he is draft eligible. I like to put that at least on the table. But I think there's a greater chance that he gets drafted than Luis Hernandez. At least that's what it seems like at the moment. But again, we'll see though. I think it would be a nice addition for them. And I think their outfield right now, they got plenty of depth there. Like,
somebody that's caught my eye too, that not from me, like just like saying, hey man, this kid's got insane numbers where he was at. But I see a lot of people that cover college baseball nationally talking about Luke Hayden being in their top 10 dudes in the portal. So Baseball America, I think, published like 3 of the top 10 and from the portal or something, whatever it was. And I'm asking, like, if Luke Hayden, who also is draft eligible, does come here, let's just say you do get back a Griffin Herring. God forbid he doesn't get drafted. Who knows? Chase Shore's return, Newt, you have Cohen, and then you have a potential for Luke Hayden if he doesn't want to go. Koki, I'm asking you a very tough question. Do you have your starting rotation already in them? Is that what's going to be it, or did they go after another big-name guy that could start?
I think if Griffin Herring comes back, I think they have the rotation. Even if Griffin Herring doesn't come back, you could argue that they already have the rotation at least. So I think they're in a pretty decent spot with the rotation. But again, they don't have a lot of left-handed options. Those are all right-handed guys except for Herring that you just mentioned. And Kate Anderson, I guess, could be an option as well. So you have a lot of potential options. And I think Cowan is pretty close to being just a option, not just a potential option. And I would say the same thing with Shores, even though, again, Shores has only pitched, 18 innings in his college career. It's kind of a gauge jump situation. But instead, we've actually seen the guy, and he's 100 on the right side with a, really good breaking ball. So, and he was the best pitcher, and he was the best pitcher in Texas coming out of high school. So we know what he can do. We've seen it. He was one of the best relievers on the team that won the national championship. And then he just got hurt. So I have high expectations for him. I think Newt is someone to at least keep an eye out for as well, just because he was the best pitcher in Texas coming out of high school, as 95 to 96 with movement. And I don't know. I just feel like if he can, stay healthy and put something together, then maybe they have something there too. So it's, you want to create as many potential options as possible, because not all these guys are going to work. That's just how baseball works. That's just how small sample size baseball works, right? We're not playing 162 games, we're playing 60. So you just want to, have as many dart throws, and many good dart throws as possible, as many Devin Sheerans. And that's why that's a smart addition, because if he doesn't work out, it's okay. But if he does work out, then you have a potential starter right there. And it's a guy who just came out of nowhere from Mount St. Mary's, So I think they have plenty of dart throws in terms of talented right-handed pitchers at the very least. Now I think they just need more depth with the left-handed side.
Last portal question. What else do you think they're going to go after? If you had to put all your chips in, what else would Jay go after in the portal if he continues, which I think he is, but if he continues, what else do you think he's going after?
Oh, I think – yeah, so I mentioned left-handed pitching. I think we talked about third base a good bit, even though I think Cale Fountain is a pretty talented kid and one of the best Nebraska prospects we've seen in a while. But you need a veteran option there. It doesn't have to be Tommy White, or, the next Tommy White or the next Jacob Berry, but it's got to be somebody.
Your next center fielder has to be Dylan Cruz. Just ask Paxton Kling.
And especially with adding Curiel, now that Curiel, we know he's coming to school, I feel even better about the outfield right now. And of course, they have Ashton Larson coming back, and potentially Jake Brown. And they could turn Jake Brown back into a pitcher, and maybe that helps fix your left-handed pitching problem. But anyway, I think the last position I think we have to mention is catcher in terms of the portal. With Brady Neal now in the portal, which did surprise me a decent bit, I think that you really only have Blaze Priester right now as the only veteran guy, and he might be the only guy, period, as a full-time catcher at least. They have a bunch of now they have 4 guys who have at least played catcher, which is weird. But heck, versatility, right? Potentially 4 if Jared Jones comes back.
You think they still need somebody that can go back there and just catch?
Yeah, I think they just need a veteran, because you don't know what's going to happen with Aaron Bede in the draft. I think I lean more towards him coming to school, and I think it would be really nice if he came to school. But from the reports that I at least read, he seems like a pretty raw player. Big power, big arm, but needs to, refine some things. And I think Jay Johnson's a good guy to refine those things, but that's not going to happen overnight in one season. So I think, do you really want to be leaning on a JUCO catcher? Granted, he was a JUCO All-American, but still a JUCO catcher as your everyday guy like that. That's just asking him a lot. And I think they do need probably one more veteran out of the transfer portal. Preferably someone from a Power 5 school.
Do you think they land any of these big guys at the top, like Kylan or Root or anything like that? Because I mean, look, Koki, the thing it's been pretty quiet on those guys up top.
Yeah, it has been very quiet with those guys at top. I think there was a report that Root visited LSU at one point. I think he makes a lot of sense because of the left-handed pitching thing that I was talking about. But it is a little bit surprising that he still hasn't really picked a I guess.
I mean, and he's at Auburn
Yeah.
today. Like the kid's taking more visits
Yeah.
than any football recruit in the history of football. I mean, like the dude's been like 7 places in 2 weeks.
Well, Auburn's been very active in the portal, if you haven't noticed.
Right, they have
which I
been.
understand why, because of how poor of a season they just had, and the fact that they've had some pretty good ones before this past year.
Right.
So it would Killen. We'll see. I mean, they have Michael Braswell, and my guess is he'll come back. So I don't know if they want to like supplant him, and I mean, I guess they could add Killen and move one of them to third base, but I don't know if they're necessarily super open to that. And like as although Braswell has his faults defensively, I think offensively he was good enough this season to the point where you want him back. I think at the end of last season really kind of convinced me that, okay, they should really try to retain this guy because you need veteran bats. You need, your Gavin Dugas, your Cade Veloso, and he can be that sort of version of a guy for you if he comes back for another season.
You know what's interesting too, Koki? I don't know if you fielded this question, but to your point about experience, I see a lot of people talking about, well, a lot of these kids are from smaller schools, and I'm like, turn the football portal thing off for just a minute. This is baseball. That's number one. But number two, like Texas A&M, the guy that just struck out, I think it was Shot. He was in the Ivy League last year. The Ivy League. Okay, and he's hitting above 300, and Texas A&M might go to a College World Series. By the way, they got 3 dudes from the Ivy League. So you got to turn your mind off too. My ultimate question becomes, when you're bringing that many guys in, there is the question, though, do they hit this type of pitching? I guess, what have we seen more from the baseball portal, in your opinion, than anywhere else?
In terms of like,
well,
whether these guys
like all these dudes for mid-majors are coming out of nowhere, and I'm like, who the hell is this kid? I mean, we had the number one dude that did it in Air Force. I mean, in Skeens. But Koki, these dudes are coming from the Ivy League. I mean, you got 3 dudes that are hitting above. Now, I'm not saying the Braden Montgomerys of the world you don't need, but the Ivy League. I mean, like, this is insane that these kids are coming from everywhere and getting to places like LSU and A&M.
Yeah, you're right, and that's just I look at it as the same way that when you add an MLB free agent or you add an NBA free agent, you don't know for sure if the guy's going to work, but you bet on the traits, you see how the guy fits into your system, and then you hope it works. And
right.
I think Jay Johnson has had a pretty decent success rate overall. Like, not everything has worked. Like, Mac Bingham wasn't necessarily lighting the world on fire this past season.
But how many more did he hit on too? I mean, he missed one.
That's what I mean. Like,
right.
So I'm not saying it's all worked, but I think for the most part it has worked for them. They haven't, like, everyone's talked about how LSU's team is built out of the portal. That really hasn't been true, because they added 6 or 7 guys last year. They added like 4 or 5 the year before. Like, they're not building they're not building the ship out of this. It's been the finishing touches. I think this year is a little bit different with that, though, because they've added 7 guys and they're probably going to add a couple more. It just when you just look at the roster, and they've added 5 JUCO guys, which is way more than they've had in years past, when they've really only added 2 or 3 at most. Last year they added 1, and that was Fidel. So I think things have changed a little bit this offseason. Part of it's because of the guys that have entered the transfer portal. I mean, in fact, they had 11 guys into the portal this year. There's only 1 or 2 last year, period. And that's what happens when you win the national championship, I guess. Things have changed for them a little bit in terms of their roster building and how they have to build their roster. But it's going to be really interesting to see how things work out, because if they're going to add more transfer portal guys, obviously they're going to be a more veteran team. And I think a lot of the season people were like, they're struggling because they're too young, or they don't have enough experience playing together, or any of those sort of things. So when you're adding portal guys, you're checking off some of those question marks, but at the same time, there's still other question marks that pop up, like, can the guy hit SEC pitching, for example, or can the guy pitch against SEC competition, and it's just really hard to tell unless you're getting a superstar level sort of commit like Tommy White, when
right.
the guy's going to hit. So that's the equivalent of signing Kevin Durant free agency, So like there really has. I don't think there's really a guy like that this year, at least from what I can tell. But like Sheeran, for example, like I mentioned him because he's a good bet, right? He goes 98, really good slider, a big body. Like no matter, like yes, he's playing. He's not playing at a great level of competition, and the numbers aren't quite as good as you want them to be. But in terms of betting on guys, that's the sort of guy you want to bet on. You want to bet on the traits, right? Because the traits translate no matter what level of competition he's playing. So I for the most part, I like their strategy in the transfer portal so far. It's been necessary in terms of filling the holes that they've needed to fill. Granted, you probably didn't want to have to be as aggressive as they have been this offseason because you wanted to bring more guys like Brady Neal and Paxton Clint back. But at the same time, you're dealt with the cards that you get, and I think they've added some pretty interesting pieces.
Two former LSU head coaches are back in the news. Which one do you want to start with, Paul Mainieri or Les Miles? Let's go to Paul. I guess Paul Mainieri, obviously going to South Carolina. Your instant reaction to him going there, taking Terry Rooney with him?
After talking with him and doing the story with him right after it was officially announced, not surprised. When you talk to him, he just felt like he said this pretty openly. He felt like he was someone who wasn't satisfied with being retired, and he just needed to get his body right and make sure it was right for him to get back into the game again. And it seems like he has after a couple more surgeries, after now he's playing golf without any pain, stuff like that. That's critical and important for him to end up getting back into coaching. And it seems like he's a lot healthier. Again, he's always had the energy. He's just a high energy guy in general. And really it was just a matter of would the right opportunity pop up, and the South Carolina opportunity is a pretty darn good opportunity, right? I mean, that's a program that the last program that went back-to-back national championships and really cares about baseball, obviously. So I think that, for him, it was almost a no-brainer. And when you look at it through that lens, it shouldn't be surprising, even if the news initially was quite surprising because oh wow, I think it's more surprising from the South Carolina side than it is from the LSU side, but from the Paul Mainieri side, I should say. But yeah, it's either way, it is one of the most interesting things that have happened this offseason.
Last thing for you, Les Miles back in the news. I know that there's been a lot around this. People either think he should be in the Hall of Fame and get back his vacay wins, or they don't. I don't feel like there's much middle ground in the middle of any of this. Maybe there is. I don't know. I guess your thoughts of Les Miles trying to or suing LSU to get his wins back.
First of all, I didn't know you could sue someone to get wins back. Usually when you sue someone, it's for money. It's not for, wins that were a part of, the 80 some odd, heck, over 100 people contributed to over years and years,
Right.
So I think in that sense, it was just a very strange, thing that popped up on the news. And I think that, yeah, again, it was just weird. It's just a very strange situation. And I mean, I wasn't here covering Les Miles, but from my understanding, that's someone who had a lot of pride and just like the success that he had here at LSU, and the fact that he's fighting back for it shouldn't be a surprise to most people. But how he's fighting back for it is definitely interesting, to say the least. Now I understand how he can sue, because I mean, he's not suing for the wins technically. He's suing for the fact that they didn't give him due process to vacate the wins in the first place. At least that's from my understanding.
And I think it's a critical point there, that he's suing for due process. I mean, it's not, I mean, Koki, you're talking about due process being like, hey, you got to have due process for an arrest. And so he didn't get what he feels day in court for those wins. I mean, you're right about the suing of the money, but I just asked the question, like, does he not have a case? And are vacated wins dumb? Like, let people decide if he's going to get in, give him the wins. I mean, I get the level 1 violation, Vidal Alexander, but my whole thing about all this has been, well, you can't complain about Will Wade and, well, everything he was doing is legal now. Well, so is Les Miles' offense on the level 1 allegation.
That's true. You know, if you're doing a legal thing at the time, it's still illegal, even if it becomes legal later.
That's what Al
So
Capone
that's part of
said,
that. Yeah.
I mean,
So,
prohibition, you know, I mean.
Yeah. You know, even if it's wrong, but like anyway, like that's kind of beside the point. Like,
Correct.
I
Correct.
guess with this, I guess with this situation in particular, like, are those? I mean, but like, are those his? You know what I mean? But like the fact, I just think it's weird that he's acting like those are my wins when. Again,
That's a good point.
Playing quarterback, he's not playing quarterback, offensive line, wide receiver, and defense at the same time while coaching. You know, so like, and vacated wins, I think in general are kind of dumb because it's like we saw the games, they happened, they're on YouTube. Like you can't just like wave them away. The Reggie Bush thing too, right? So,
well, and that's the kind of point that I was getting to. That's a good point about Reggie Bush. Like, hey man, can we remember history? And then there comes a part for me, Koki. Like I just went and looked the other day when he said, I was like, all right, well, number one, is he a Hall of Famer? Is a big question. But number two, who's in there as coaches? And like Joe Paterno wasn't kicked out of the Hall of Fame after all of that stuff. I mean, he's got the same number of national titles as Mac Brown. So, I mean, there's a lot of coaches that won a national title that are in the College Football Hall of Fame. And I'm like, I mean, give Mike Leach, okay, his day, and then give Les Miles a chance. That's all I'm saying. Just leave him alone. Let him go out in the sunset. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, with Hall of Fames, I think it's weird to put like. I'm just saying this generally. I'm not saying this like as a pro Les Miles take or anything like that. I just think in general, it's weird to say like, all right, he has 299 wins, not 300, so we can't put him in. You know, or
you know what it is? You ever seen the movie Mr. 3000 with Bernie Mac?
I haven't.
Okay. You need to go watch Mr. 3000. He technically named after getting 3,000 hits. His name's Mr. 3000, and he had like 287. So you had to go back and get them to get Mr. 3000, right? And the Brewers sucked or whatever. I mean, it's like, come on, man. I mean, come on, give it to him. I mean, history's history. All right, Koki Riley from The Advocate, man, I really appreciate it. Your first time here. I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much. I know everybody knows, but just in case, where can they find all your work and everything you're doing?
Yeah, you can find me at theadvocate.com and then NOLA.com. Obviously, the New Orleans Times Picayune, the newspaper in New Orleans, and then The Advocate here in Baton Rouge. So you can find me there, and you can find me on X, Twitter, whatever the heck you call it, at Koki Riley. So,
do you still say tweet? Like I say, I tweeted the other day. Do you say you reposted?
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
No.
I feel like a crazy person because everybody's like, "Hey, this is X," and I'm like, "Hey, man, I saw it on Twitter. You know, I'm not calling it. Call it whatever you want."
Yeah, I refuse to. I refuse to, buy into that. I'm sorry.
Me too. All right, Koki Riley, thank you so much, bud.